Good evening and welcome everyone to our webinar, our Green Group webinar. My name is Ian Ritchie and I'm with the Green Group of the Diocese of Ontario, and I'm a priest who ministers here at St. Luke's, Camden East, here in southeastern Ontario. Welcome to everyone who is joining us online. You saw the logo for the Green Group of the Diocese of Ontario. To begin with, welcoming you to the webinar. And I'd just like to talk for a few minutes about what the Green Group is about. If we could go back to screen share, I'll ask our tech support person, Jim Young, to go back to screen share and then go to the third slide down. There's the logo of the Diocese of Ontario and also of Red Squirrel, but yeah, the second slide has our logo and also the Red Squirrel logo, which is the organization that does energy audits. They are certified for the province of Ontario to do energy audits in buildings, in residences, and they are the organization that you would want to contact if you want to have an energy audit done for your building. They are certified to do that work. They are not contractors, they will not install, but they can give you very good advice, and they are the group through which we were enabled to contact our guest speaker for this evening, whose name is Ian Kilbourne. If we go to the next slide, you'll see what the Green Group of the Diocese of Ontario is about. It's about the fifth mark of mission, which is to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. And those of you who have been following what's been happening in baptismal services over the last few years, that is now incorporated into one of the covenant promises that people are asked to make when they are baptized into the Anglican Church, the fifth mark of mission. And it becomes a promise in those covenantal promises to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. That is basically what our diocesan Green Group is about. And through the miracles of modern technology, we are now enabled to reach more parts of the diocese. I've been finding it wonderful to get in contact with people all across the diocese in preparation for this webinar. I've been enabled to recently to talk to Doug Cowley, who was in charge of a project in Delta. And I invited him to this webinar this evening because it was mentioned that in their revisioning of what the church buildings could be used for as community space, he had mentioned that they were looking for new furnace, actually for both of their buildings. They've already acquired one for one of them, but there's still another one coming up. So I invited him to this webinar, but our guest speaker tonight is Ian Kilbourne, who is an engineer. You can stop the screen share at this point. Thank you. And looks like we have quite a few people in the meeting. That's a good sign. And so I would like to, because in all of our Green Group meetings, we begin the meeting with prayer because we are focused on what God, our Creator, can do. So let us pray. The Lord be with you. Gracious God, our Creator and our Maker and our friend, we pray that you will be with us this evening as we consider care for your creation, as we consider how best to be good stewards of your creation, as we consider taking care in the garden that you have put us in. We pray that you would bless this meeting and guide us. For we pray in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Now I would ask Ian Kilborn to join us at this time. We see his presentation on screen there, so that's good to see. And I will turn the meeting over to Ian Kilborn at this time.
Thank you very much, Reverend Ritchie. So I'm sharing screen, and I've got two screens here, and I want to make sure ideally that I have the correct one. Are you seeing my simple full screen, or are you seeing the one that has a preview in the corner?
You see one with the preview, Ian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me just try and fix that. Bear with me for a moment. Okay, do you see the full screen now?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good. Okay, well, welcome everybody. How many people do we have on the call? I'm sorry, I started 15 minutes ago to log in, and I sat down on my computer, and I had the rolling ball of death, and it said updating. Please do not turn off your computer. So I'm a little bit late. How many people do we have?
I'm not sure because you're sharing the screen. I can't view the participants.
Okay, all right.
It looked like
we
there
were up to about 20 some before you popped in.
Okay, all right, that's great. I would suggest if you have questions, I'm going to try and move along fairly briskly and leave lots of time for questions and discussion. But if you have questions on what I'm talking about or the slide that's like right in front of us, please just put them into the chat if you know how to do that. And I'll keep my eye on the chat, and I will try to address those questions as they come up, and it'll make it just a little bit more kind of interactive and a little bit more like we're all in the same room, even though we're not. So that would be helpful. And you know, as with all Zooms, if you're not talking, it's helpful if you mute your mic so that any clunking or background sounds don't come through to everybody. So through here. There we go. So the first thing to think about, of course, is the cost, and so you can do this yourself, is to figure out where do your energy dollars go, and this is, you know, analysis of your utility bills, and even just getting this basic information. Lots of people are a little bit muddled on what it's going to look like, but what we really want to see is a breakdown with all the different energy costs and how much money you're spending on each thing, and that's kind of the first step to guiding what your priorities will be. Another thing you may be interested in is how many tons of CO2 am I using in a year? How much, you know, what's our environmental impact? And that depends on the mix of fuels. As you can see in this slide here, we've got oil, and oil, of course, is just about the worst for greenhouse gases in terms of the amount of emissions that come from that. You get the same amount of heat from other fuels with a lot less emissions. This is in tons of equivalent CO2 per year. Electricity in Ontario is pretty good. It's not too much carbon involved in making electricity in Ontario. There is some. So it's really the fuel of choice for the future for everybody. We're going to have to electrify everything to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. But you know, as a group, you're going to have to decide what weight you want to put on environmental factors as you're deciding decisions to make about a building. When we do a complete energy audit on a building, we end up with something like this. This requires a fairly deep investigation and a computer model to be built of the building. And once we do that, you can see exactly where your heat loss is. Heat being the, you know, for most buildings, heat is the largest expense. Lighting and other electrical loads can be significant, but heating is usually the heaviest one over the years. So it's worth looking at, where is the heat going through the building. And so you have all the various different pathways, walls and ceilings and basements and foundations and floors. And then you've got this one here, which is air leakage. And to get a number for air leakage, we do a blower door test on a building. Without a blower door test, we can make some guesses based on the age of the building and its general condition as to how loose or tight it is. And of course, most old buildings are pretty loose, and it's not at all uncommon to have an air leakage of something like 25% of your heat loss. Lighting and heat. So most of our electrical loads, unless you're heating with electricity, most of our electrical loads will come down to lighting. Most churches that I've seen recently have already had quite a few lighting upgrades. There's been some great programs for lighting upgrades in the past few years. And we're not seeing, for the most part, huge lighting loads. If you've already got LED lighting in most places, you're pretty much at the finish line as far as reducing electrical loads from lighting. If you still have incandescent lighting, then there's plenty of opportunities to make changes. One of the great things that you can get these days from your utility bills are a tremendous amount of data. And for most utilities, certainly Hydro One, you can get hourly data that shows your electrical consumption hour by hour. And so here's an example. And so the numbers on the left are kilowatts. And so we've got a bunch of days here. I don't know how many days. I think every time you see a bump, that's a day. So, we've got a couple of weeks here, I think. You can see that the loads never go below maybe 800 or so. So like 0.8 on this scale, which would be 800 watts. So this is a building that is apparently averaging 800 watts all night long. And that's a place where you want to put your attention with electrical loads. And when you look at this slide, the blue color, everything that's blue is costing you money. So if you spend a lot of time trying to reduce one of these peaks up here, there's not very much blue in that peak. It's a pretty thin line. It didn't last for very long. The big money to be saved is down here. So if you can take a slice out of this base load that runs all the time, that's a big savings compared to hunting the peaks, which in the case of a church, of course, usually happen whenever the church is occupied for worship. It might only be 2 or 3 hours for a week, and that can be a peak. Worry about what's happening all night long, every day of the week, and you can get that from your utility bills, not from the bills themselves, but from the websites of the utility companies. So a little bit of basic principles here on heat loss in buildings, and it's analogous to this leaking bucket. And so we pour heat into these buildings, and it leaks out all the time, whether we like it or not. And so if we want to have a reasonable temperature inside, we have to pour it in as fast as it's leaking out. If we don't keep up, then the temperature inside will fall. If we pour it in faster than it leaks out, then it's going to get warmer and warmer inside. So obviously, the more leaks that you can plug, the less filling you have to do, and the filling is what is costing you so much money. 3 things contribute to heat loss, and they're all equal in proportions. So the surface area of your building, so the surface area that's exposed to the cold, the conductivity of the materials that the building is made of, R value, we say in construction terms. And the last thing is the temperature difference. So, if you have a big temperature difference between indoors and outdoors, you're going to have more heat loss. But all of these things contribute equally. They're equally proportional. So this is why setting back thermostats saves us money, because we get closer to the outdoor air temperature. As we get closer to the outdoor air temperature, we have less difference between inside and outside, and it takes less heat to maintain that difference. So you can be very aggressive about setting back thermostats, and there is savings to be had from doing that. So those are sort of from thermodynamics. These are the three ways that you lose heat from a building. Real buildings have a fourth one, and that's air leakage. And so this is heat that is carried by air. So if you have warm air that escapes somehow through the building, through cracks and around windows and cracks in the walls, cracks in the floors, there's a million places where it might go depending on the construction type. When that warm air escapes, it's taking heat with it. And that can be, as you saw from the first slide, pretty significant. Air leakage is driven by three main factors: the wind that hits the building, the stack effect, which is the tendency for warm air to rise. And so buildings will tend to leak outwards at the top, and they will tend to leak inwards at the bottom. If you're near the top of the building, you won't ever feel a cold draft, even though it's leaky, because it's all the warm air from below that's going by. You may have seen buildings in the wintertime where the third floor, all the people have the windows open in the apartments. There's something terrible going on in that building. They aren't feeling cold drafts. It's all the warm air from down below that is disappearing out through those windows. And the same is true in real buildings. The last thing that causes leakage, air leakage, is if you have devices inside the building that consume air, well, all of that air has to come from somewhere. And most older buildings don't have intentional balanced air supplies. And so the air typically will leak into the building to make up for whatever is being exhausted by a furnace that uses air, a boiler that uses air, exhaust fans, say in your kitchens that use air, or in your bathrooms that use air. All of that air is replaced by air that leaks in. And when it leaks in, it's coming in cold, and you've lost warm air going out. Sorry, there's a better picture of those three effects, but I've already talked about them, so I'm just going to click on through. So this is what a blower door test looks like. It does two things. It will measure the air leakage, so we actually get a number expressed in air changes per hour. And the other thing, if you have somebody who's willing to spend some time, or you can get your hands on a blower door for a couple of days, then you can go around and you can find a bunch of those leaks. It's not expensive to deal with air leakage in many buildings. Sometimes it is, but often the sources are not so numerous, and you can knock it back with foam and caulking and filling obvious places.
You want it to. You want it really tongue and taste. With the Bell Wi-Fi pods, work from anywhere you want.
I'm hearing some background noise. I just remind people to mute your microphone if you're not trying to speak. Thank you. So strategies that to look at in terms of this. One is to reduce the heat loss. The other one, of course, is to reduce the cost of making the heat. And often in an older building, especially say a stone church, you are quite limited in what you can do to the building envelope. And so at that point, it might be that your money is better spent on coming up with the least expensive way of making heat that you can, rather than trying to reduce the heat loss from the building. And these are individual decisions. There's not a rule of thumb that is going to work for all buildings in this respect. It's just two things to think about. And we're going to do some of each in many buildings. Managing set points and schedule. Remember that the heat loss is proportional to the temperature difference. So anytime your building is being kept warmer than it needs to be, you're spending money you don't need to spend. And so having thermostats, many churches have multiple thermostats. If you can get those all onto Wi-Fi thermostats so that somebody can manage it from home, and they can go, well, we've got a group coming in on Tuesday night at 7. I'm going to warm that space up an hour ahead, and I'm going to turn it off when they leave at 8. You can set that all up. there's a lot of money to be saved there, typically, if it's not being managed carefully right now. And, you know, the cost of a Wi-Fi thermostat these days is, you know, $120, $150. Don't buy a boutique thermostat like a Nest. You can just get a more of an ordinary Wi-Fi thermostat, and you can get, if you get them all the same brand, you'll have a dashboard and you can see them all in one place. So managing set points and schedule, the cost of that is very low compared to the return, unless you're doing a beautiful job of it right now.
I thought you couldn't ride her.
Again, I'm hearing noise. Please check your microphones. Good. So this is a slide that I've developed from a spreadsheet, and into this I put the typical efficiencies of all these different heating systems, and I put the typical cost of the fuel, whether it's oil or propane or electricity. And you know, we can run this spreadsheet with the actual costs that that your building uses. These things are ever changing, but this is typically, it looks something like this. So if you have a church in the city and you've got access to natural gas, here you are over here. You are in a completely different situation than everybody who's in the country who has to heat with oil, propane, or perhaps electric baseboards. Look at the difference. It is, you know, it's more than twice, isn't it? It's 3 times more expensive to not have access to natural gas. It's a tremendous difference that that we have to live with in our rural buildings. Coming over here, what's an ASHP? Well, that is an air source heat pump. And that is going to be the go-to choice for rural buildings in order to get off of these big numbers here. Typically is the air source heat pump. It's going to be the go-to choice for everybody over here who's on gas too, as we start to care more and more about greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to get onto electricity. You're going to have to jump over here too to the air source heat pump. Is it going to save you money? Nope. You can see it's about the same as gas, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on the price of the day. As carbon taxes come in over the next years, of course, the gas will get more expensive, we hope, compared to the electricity. But this is the place that that I'm going to suggest that we'll probably end up going. GSHP is the ground source heat pump. Yes, it's cheaper to run than the air source heat pump, but it costs twice or 3 times or more to install than this one does. So the savings just doesn't pay back. Interestingly, here's wood pellets and here's cordwood. So, you know, lots of people heat with those at home. Not so many people are heating churches with those things. And even they don't, you know, they're not as, you know, the cordwood is about even with the air source heat pump, right? And what a lot of work and mess you have heating with wood. So I've got some pictures now of just real buildings, kind of just to chat about. And so here's a church you might recognize if you're from the Kingston area. This is downtown on Union Street, right next door to Queens. And so when you've got buildings like this that are made of stone, the stone walls are super thick, and you might think, oh, you know, this is a wonderful solid building, and it is structurally. But look at the R values; they're just dreadful. So a new house, we've got R values of about R25 in the walls. Sorry, just my camera's bouncing around here. R25 is typical, and more than that even for a new house today. This is older. And what do we got in the stone? Well, if we have 20 inches of stone, which is typical, the R value is only 0.1 per inch. So we're talking about 2.2. So it's you know, it's 10% of what a new house would be. In fact, worse. If you've got a solid brick building, typically you've got brick walls that are 8 inches thick and little or no, usually no insulation on the inside, maybe a little airspace and some plaster. You know, your R value is even worse. It could be, you know, under 2, right? So these are fantastically low R values. They're very conductive walls. The heat just flies through them. And this is what we're up against if we've got older buildings that are either solid brick or stone. Not to be confused with brick veneer, where you have a frame wall on the inside. You have an opportunity now to put insulation in that wall if it isn't already there. Here's some pictures of some churches I've been in, just to chat. So, here's a flat ceiling, insulated flat ceiling, some old knob and tube wiring there. This is fiberglass insulation that's blowing in there. So not very much. It's only probably only 4 inches deep or so in there. Great opportunity to fix this up. This is about the easiest situation you can find if you've got a flat area like that that's just poorly insulated and has good access. You can blow cellulose in there is probably typically the best choice. Anywhere you have ducts in unheated spaces or sort of semi-heated spaces, that's pretty bad news. And we want to either think about a way of making the space where the ducts are, bring it into the thermal envelope so that it becomes a heated space. And often that's not as difficult as it sounds. You can insulate these foundations on the inside. They're not even huge. If it's a fairly low space, you're not talking about a lot of square feet of walls. And you can insulate those exterior walls. Never do this. This is insulating the floor up above. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. You're much better to spend your effort on insulating the walls in a crawl space or a basement than the floor, especially when you have these ducts here. If you think about it, the hottest air in the whole place is inside these ducts. And why would you want to have them running through the coldest air in the whole place, which is your semi-heated or unheated crawl space or basement? Remember, temperature difference is one of the things that drives heat loss. So if you've got the very hottest air inside the duct, it's a good deal hotter than the set point of the room. And you've got that right next to the coldest air. Well, you're going to have a lot of heat loss, aren't you? And look at this insulation here. It's very, very thin. That stuff's an inch at best. It's got an R value of maybe R3 for air that's super hot. So ducts in unheated spaces are trouble, and there's different ways of dealing with them, but try to avoid that and try to deal with it in a smart way if you do have it. Here's some infrared pictures. So this is the church. This is Reverend Ritchie's church in Camden East, and so you can see the walls up above. So first of all, this is blue things are cold. And yellow is warm, right? So the walls up above are not so bad. We're on the outside, so cold is good. And as we move down, look at the foundation wall. It looks like it's on fire. So tons of heat loss through this stone foundation wall here. Some great people in the congregation, some volunteers got together after my first visit, and they did some work on this door because the door was just blowing in the breeze, and they put some foam on the inside of the door. And you can see now the door is noticeably colder than the rest of the wall. So whatever was done on the inside of this door was relatively successful. We've still got some heat loss down here, but it's not as bad as it is up here, coming straight through the stone. So don't ignore your foundations, and remember, stone is dreadful. The framed walls up here are doing much better. Don't forget your outdoor lighting. If these lights are on if there's lights are on all night, they're pretty big consumers. And remember that graph I showed you at the beginning of your electrical consumption. Look for the things that have the longest duty cycle. Don't waste your money putting an LED bulb in a closet that hardly ever gets turned on. Go for the lights that have the longest run times, and spend your money there. And outdoor lighting is often part of that. Even the lights inside a sign. If you've got a large sign, could be significant. So question here from Philip on the chat. Does insulating a stone basement cause mold? So I'll just come back to that. And I would say, no, it does not cause mold. It usually helps with mold. Mold, of course, grows when you have moisture. And so the better a job we can do of eliminating moisture, the better off we'll be as far as mold goes. Cold surfaces, what happens is whenever you have warm air, it has moisture in it. When that warm air contacts a cold surface, some of the moisture will condense and become liquid water on that cold surface. And this creates a habitat for mold. So if we can get rid of our cold surfaces, we're going to have less mold in the end. So that's, insulating a stone foundation has some challenges to it, and there are some risks, or stone walls in general. As you insulate on the inside, no matter what you do, you're going to reduce the temperature on the outside. That's the goal, after all, is to make this cold instead of hot. When you do that, it's going to freeze more than it used to. And when it freezes, it will be subject to damage from freeze-thaw cycles if there's water that gets into the mortar joints or between the stones. So the drier that wall is, the better, and the condition of the mortar is also, if you've got good mortar joints and the wall is relatively dry, then insulating on the inside is not going to be much of a risk. If there's a way that water is continually hitting that wall and the mortar is in poor condition and you insulate on the inside, you're going to accelerate the degradation of that wall. So again, there's not a rule of thumb here. It's very situation dependent. Insulating stone on the outside is ideal from a building science point of view, because then we bring it into the building envelope, it stays nice and warm and dry. But hardly anybody wants to do that because the stone is nice to look at, and but there are situations where it does make a lot of sense to do that, and we've done it in places. I hope that answers your question, Philip. Lots of high ceilings, of course, in most of our places of worship, whether they're church halls or whether they're the sanctuary itself. There was a question, Dr. Ritchie had a question about fans and are they valuable or not. Most churches do have fans up in these spaces. And he kind of answered the question himself too. You know, if the fans are powerful enough to actually push the warm air down to floor level, then yeah, they're useful. If it's too high and the fans are going too slowly, then you're just wasting your money on the electricity of spinning them around. I think the thing to do is to turn them on and test and see, does it get warmer down at the level where you are when you turn on those fans? If it does, it's a good thing. Leave them on during the heating season, but make sure you turn them off during the shoulder season, and probably in the summer too, unless they actually stir enough air to create a pleasant breeze. But otherwise, we might as well just let that hot air sit up there and be away from us. Places like this, of course, are pretty challenging to try to improve the insulation level in a roof like that. But any time that you are re-roofing, if you're re-roofing on the outside, absolutely make sure that you evaluate the insulation at that time. You know, that's the time when it's going to be cost effective to do insulation. It's not going to be if you have to tear off the roof and put on a new roof, but if the roof is at the end of its life and you got to do that anyways, that's the time to look at your insulation and, you know, get an energy audit done, get an energy model done, get somebody to tell you, how much money will I save by putting on 1 inch of foam? How much money will I save by putting on 2 inches of foam? Once you've got those numbers, you can make informed decisions. You know, the roofers will wave their hand and go, oh yeah, we should put a couple inches on there. But they don't, you know, they don't do this analysis, and it's different for every building. There's not rules of thumb here that are really helpful. In a building like this, if you really wanted to, you could put insulation in these squares here. You could put foam in there and then you could resurface it on the inside with drywall. That would cost a lot less than tearing off the roofing on the outside. So yeah, there are some things that we can do. Here we are measuring insulation levels in a sloping ceiling. So some churches have sloping ceilings that you see on the inside, and there's actually attic cavities above them, and you can get in there and you can see what you've got, and you have plenty of opportunity then to increase insulation levels because there's a space that you can move around in. Houses these days have 12 to 16 inches of insulation in the attics, right? In these churches, you're lucky to find 6 or 8. Here's another infrared image that shows you what's going on around a doorway. This is Dr. Ritchie's church as well. So this is a door to a storage area. And the storage area is actually outside the original building of the church. It's an add-on and it's not heated. When you're in the room, it just looks like another interior room, but in fact, it's almost at outdoor temperatures, right? Because there's no heating out there. And so when you have something like that, decide where your thermal boundary is and defend it aggressively. Don't do sort of a half job on the door and a half job on the wall outside. Either decide that this is my thermal boundary or that's my thermal boundary and put some effort into it. So here we've got just a thin wooden interior door. Of course, it has no water. Of course, it has no weather stripping because it looks like an interior door, but it isn't really because it's got cold air behind it. And the infrared camera shows us exactly how dreadful it is. Lots of places you're going to find things like this where ceilings meet walls. Some of this is air leakage, and that can be fixed relatively easily. Some of it is flaws in the original construction. And all buildings will tend to have more heat loss at these corners. Also, it can be the fact that the heat's not getting there. You have to be careful with infrared images. It can be a question of heat distribution, not heat loss. Here's what I just love to find as an energy auditor. So here we are looking up at a ceiling with the infrared camera. You can see the ceiling joists here, or maybe they're trusses, I don't know. Of course, if you're looking with your eye, all you see is a white ceiling. And here we see this one section here is blue, much bluer than the rest. So there's something going on here that's a problem. The insulation's been removed by a heating contractor who was running a duct bathroom exhaust fan or something, and they didn't put it back, or there's some problem with the insulation in that particular space. Easy to fix if you can get into the attic, right? So here we come to making heat. And so as I showed in that earlier slide, the least expensive ways are going to be natural gas. The air source heat pump wins for environmental as well as cost of energy. And the ground source heat pump is a little bit better, but the cost of installing ground source heat pumps is prohibitive right now, certainly not worth the extra little bit of savings that you're going to get. Air source heat pumps have improved dramatically in the last 10 years. We now have what's called a cold climate heat pump, and it's designed to operate at temperatures down to -20 or even colder. There's different ways of configuring heating systems if you move to these heat pumps. So this is a heating head on the inside, and this will be an air source heat pump. So here's what they can look like if you don't have a duct system. Say your building is hot water, and you want to move to air source heat pumps. You can go air to water and maintain the water system, but you can also go with something like this. These can be separate units, in which case we call them mini splits, where there's an interior unit and an exterior unit paired together. Or they can be multiple interior heads connected to one or more exterior units. And we might call that a VRF, or a variable refrigerant volume system. But they're ductless. They're also called ductless systems for obviously because there's no ducts. So the heat just comes straight out of these. They're very quiet. There's no moving parts in there except a fan. There's a coil that gets hot from the refrigeration, from the refrigerant that's running through it, and a long fan. They're pretty quiet, and they also provide cooling, which most of us have never had in our churches. So for the same price, you will get cooling. Of course, it's going to cost you some money to operate it, but if you only operate it a little bit, it won't be too significant. So that's one way of doing an air source heat pump. Another way is to put it into your existing duct system. And a third way is to integrate it with a hot water system and use a heat pump that makes hot water. They are the least common of all, a little bit hard to find contractors that know how to do that. Here's maybe that same building with these units on the outside. Sure, they're not beautiful to look at, but we're trying to save these buildings, and we're trying to keep them going, and we're trying to do something that will be viable for the years to come. And sometimes compromises have to get made. So if you had more money to spend, you could have all of these things be one central unit, and you could put it around the other side where it was out of sight. But it's less expensive to have the outdoor unit paired with the indoor one right behind it. So if you're shopping on air source heat pumps, as Dr. Ritchie has been doing, make sure you're looking for cold climate heat pumps. The number to compare to look at how good they are at heating is this number called the HSPF, Heating Season Performance Factor. That will allow you to kind of compare apples to apples when you're looking at two different units. The output, so when it gets colder outside, it's harder to pull heat from that air. Two things happen. One is that the capacity of the unit goes down. So if it was 80,000 BTUs per hour at -10, it's not going to produce that much heat at -20. The other thing that happens is it becomes less efficient as the temperature goes down. So for the heat that you get, it will cost you more per unit of heat than it will at the shoulder seasons when it's not as cold. But the graphs that I showed you of costs, this is overall cost for a season, and it accounts for the fact that it's going to be more difficult when it's really cold. But we don't have very many days in the winter that are below -20. When you look at a graph of the whole heating season and where the heat load comes from, most of it is at pretty moderate temperatures. These things, of course, are electric. You've got to assess your electric service capacity. Have you got enough amps in the building to look after it? That might need to be upgraded, and that can be expensive depending on the situation. The other thing is you're going to take some practice to learn when to come out of setback for different outside air temperatures. The colder it is outside, the longer it's going to take to heat up the building to get it ready for Sunday morning or whenever you need to have it ready for. And so you can do that with automatic controls that measure the outside air temperature, and they kind of learn, or you can do it manually with somebody who's going to take responsibility for that and just say, oh, it's a really cold night tonight. I'm going to make sure I take this. I'm going to set the thermostat up at 3 in the morning so that I know it'll be warm for 8:30 or 9. And that will come from experience of learning to operate your own building. Contractors may tell you, don't set these things back, just let them run all the time. Well, if you want to get good savings, you got to set them back. You've just got to learn when is the time to change the thermostat setting as you need it for occupancy. There we go. So I only got one question so far in the whole piece. That's my contact. This slide set will be available to you somehow. I'm not sure how. Dr. Ritchie can chime in on that. But so I'm hoping you've got some questions or discussion. And I think you can unmute your mic if you've got a question, and we'll just do that live rather than typing. If you prefer to type, I've got my eye on the chat.
I just noticed that we have natural gas, and the only advantage of going away from natural gas is the fossil fuel or the carbon footprint. Is that the way you look at it compared to a ground or heat source air pump?
Yes,
Here.
I think that's a fair statement in most cases. Yep. Unless your natural gas heating system is excessively old and inefficient. And you know, when it comes to be near the end of its life and you've got to replace it anyway, I'd look hard at a heat pump at that point. And residentially, we're going to have some great incentives soon to do things like replace gas furnaces with heat pumps. There are some. Are they going to apply to a building like a church? Not the big programs. There is a program called Save on Energy by Hydro One. Well, it's administered through Hydro One, and we think that it will apply to many of the church upgrades. That will give you some money for doing that.
Ian, just wondering if we have 3 furnaces in our sanctuary. They're all different ages. One of them is quite old. Could you replace them one at a time with air source heat pumps?
Sure. Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. Yep. Depending on the sizing of the air source heat pump, sometimes you do need a boost for it, for if you want to be sure that you're going to be able to meet the set point on a -25 day. And so, you know, having one gas furnace still in the mix will help you with that, providing the air can find its way around. Yeah.
Well, I like the air source heat pump because it also gives you air conditioning. That's like a freebie.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure it does. Yeah. And if you have a hot water system, that's one of your problems. The drawbacks, I love hydronic hot water systems, but if you put in a heat pump to the hot water system, you don't get the benefit of the cooling because you can't really cool with radiators. Okay, so here's on the chat. Are there air source heat pumps compatible with steam distribution? I'm going to say no. Yeah. I'll take away the hesitation and say no. Steam is an extremely energy intensive media. There's way more heat in a pipe full of steam than there is in a pipe full of hot water. And so your only option with an air source heat pump that would come close would be to make hot water with it. But if you put hot water through the same pipe that used to put steam through, you won't get enough heat. There's not enough energy embodied in the hot water. So what you're going to have to do is abandon the distribution system you have and go to those wall-mounted units and heat your space that way.
Notice there was no mention of solar panels or anything moving in that direction.
So that was kind of I just barely heard that, but the question was, there was no mention of solar panels or anything like that. So yeah, I would certainly endorse solar panels. And by solar panels, I'm talking now about photovoltaics, ones that make electricity. There are also solar panels that make either hot air or hot water. The cost effectiveness of those is unfortunately is pretty low. But the photovoltaics that make electricity, absolutely. If you've got a roof that faces more or less south and is more or less unshaded, in most situations today, you'll probably have about a 10-year payback on putting in photovoltaics. And might be 12, might be 9, somewhere in there, depending on how difficult the installation is. And of course, those numbers depend greatly on what happens to electricity prices in the future. And electricity pricing is very political in Ontario, unlike the pricing of our other fuels like propane or natural gas or oil. So if electricity gets more and more expensive, then your photovoltaic system will have a great payback. If it stays cheaper, gets cheaper, not quite as much. When you put in a photovoltaic system, basically you're buying 20 years of electricity upfront with one check. And so the value of that depends on what is 20 years of electricity worth. But you don't need batteries or anything like that. These are grid connected systems. If they're 10 kilowatts or under, in most places, the paperwork required to do it with your utility is not too hard. There are places where the utility will not allow it because they don't have capacity on the lines. And so that's an early thing to figure out, is whether the utility will allow you to do it or not. But yeah, 10 or 12 years, it's a wonderful endowment for someone to donate that. They're going to know that their contribution is going to reduce energy costs for the next 20 years. I mean, these PV panels are warranted for 20 years, so they're going to have a good long life.
Well, when all these people are driving electric cars pull up to the church, they're gonna have to have some juice to plug into that.
I had difficulty hearing that. I heard it's something about driving electric cars up to the church.
Yeah, well, when you get to the church, you need to plug in maybe.
Ted, I don't know if you can get closer to your microphone or if somebody else is hearing. I think it's Ted who's speaking, but I can't tell.
No, it's Peter.
Yeah, it was Peter that was talking.
Oh, okay. Did you hear what Peter said?
The same as you, I did not pick it up.
Okay. Peter, if you're able to get closer to your microphone, we're just barely hearing you. Nope. Okay.
He was
Uh,
asking about people charging their electric cars when they come to church.
Yeah, so I drive an electric car, and I wouldn't foresee ever needing to charge it when I came to church. I charge it at home every night, and I would think it's unlikely that I go to a church that's so far away that I can't go to the church and back again. I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had my mic in the wrong socket.
There, we hear you very well now, Peter. Did we get your question right?
Yeah, I wondered why I'm hearing this low voices, and I'm thinking, why am I not getting this? I had my headset in the wrong socket.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was wondering about the possibility of solar panels or a mix.
You were wondering about solar panels and?
Or a mix of using heat pumps.
Yeah, well, the solar panels just produce electricity. It's just a little business on your roof making electricity. If your building uses it, great. If your building doesn't use it, then it runs backwards through the meter, so to speak, and you get a credit for it on your bill. That's called net metering. So it doesn't really matter what you're doing inside the building. You get the same value out of the photovoltaics on the roof, as long as they don't exceed the building's consumption at the end of the year. The utility won't pay you for an excess, but it allows you to carry a credit forward. So typically what happens is we make a lot of extra electricity in the summer with our solar systems. And we develop a credit with the utility. And then, come October and November, when it gets dark and nasty outside, then the solar doesn't produce too much, and we use that credit. And we want to come out to be, we don't want to make more at the end of the year than we need, which is seldom a problem. But you do have to size the system with that in mind.
Interesting. Thank
Ian,
you.
I was wondering if perhaps he was referring to the type of solar panels that are thermal solar panels, where they use the hot water heating solar panel and put that hot water into the well where a ground source heat pump is removing heat from the water underground.
Yep.
Because I've seen that was being recommended 10 years ago, but I think the numbers on a lot of these things have changed radically over the last 10 years.
Yeah, well, what's happened in the last 10 years is air source heat pumps have just gotten so much better that the gap between air and ground is narrowed. Yes, it makes wonderful sense thermodynamically to run solar thermal panels all summer, dump that heat into the ground, so you're sort of charging up the ground, and then your ground source heat pump will run more efficiently during the winter because the ground is that much warmer. There's an amazing community in Alberta called Okotoks, which was heavily funded by the federal government as an experiment. There's 50 houses there, and they share a district heating system. Every house has solar thermal panels on the garage that do just that. They put heat into the ground in the wintertime in a central borehole network. So all the houses are heated and cooled using a central plant and a bunch of boreholes in the ground. It works beautifully. They've been net zero for years.
Wow.
But the capital cost of it is substantial.
Yeah.
I'll just scroll down the chat here and see if there's anything new. Great. Here's somebody posting a resource listing all air source heat pump manufacturers and ratings from NEEP. Yep. Are there air source? Yep. Good. All right. I haven't seen anything new on the chat. Anybody else got no stupid questions? Everything's interesting, probably to somebody else too.
2 questions I'd like to ask.
Okay.
One is maintenance costs for these type of heat pumps, and what's their potential life expectancy?
They will be similar to a central air conditioner that you would have at home. In both of those